The JVC HA-FW1800 is an earphone that shares the same driver as the luxurious HA-FW10000, but without the same eye-watering price tag, with an MSRP of only $600 versus the latter's $1,600. But $600 is still a hefty price to pay for an earphone that only uses a single dynamic driver. So should you take the plunge, or save the money and buy something else? That's what we're trying to find out in this video. This is Earphoneus Fanaticus, and today I present to you my detailed review of the JVC HA-FW1800. My reviews are always super freaking long, so as usual, you can skip to whatever part that interests you the most by clicking the timestamps in the description down below. Let's start with physical design. The FW1800 is a JVC earphone with true JVC heritage, having been constructed mostly out of wood. They don't just use wood to make the housing, they even use it to make the 11mm driver inside. There have been countless products by JVC that uses the same principle, wood for the driver and wood for the housing. I happen to have a jerry-rigged quad JVC speaker setup that's still alive and kicking after 14 years, and having had the pleasure to look at these beauties every day, I can see why the company is so obsessed with it. Coming back to the earphone, I do think it's very attractive looking too. The champagne gold metal bits and the black wooden housing make for something that I really can't get tired of looking at. The black color might make it hard to see the texture, but upon close inspection, you can definitely see and feel the wood grain. All the other earphones I have either use metal or acrylic to make the housing, and seeing the 1800 just makes me wish that more companies would do the same and experiment with cool materials. Removing the ear tip reveals a 5.5mm nozzle, which, as we found out with the Tin Hi-Fi T4, is apparently a very good size for tip rolling. Ugh, that means I'm gonna have to try like 10 ear tips with this earphone. Again. Looking closer at the nozzle, we can see an extremely fine mesh that functions both as the acoustic filter and an earwax guard. Because this earphone only uses one single dynamic driver, it makes sense why we don't see multiple bores here. And because of this, right off the bat we should expect no vertical layering from this earphone. We can, however, see that near the base of the nozzle, there are two vent ports which are usually used to weaken the bass. There's probably potential here to make the earphone bassier by covering the front ports, but as I'll talk about in the sound signature analysis, a mod like that is probably unnecessary. Comparing this to the FDX1, which I reviewed quite a while back, we can see that the shape of the medial side is pretty much identical between the two. And so if you have tried the FDX1 before and found it comfortable, you will like how the 1800 fits as well. At 15 grams without cord, it is not as weighty as the 20 grams FDX1 with its stainless steel housing, so I actually found the 1800 to be just marginally more comfortable. Isolation is just average, however, and it will never compete with earphones that use custom-like shells, which has the advantage of covering the concha. But coming back to the comparison, one advantage it has over the 1800 is that it does feature rotating nozzles for a more customized fit. I don't find it too big of an advantage, however, because I mostly end up adjusting it to the same angle as the 1800 anyway. It also features swappable filters unlike the 1800, so some might even find the FDX1 more interesting as a result. Both earphones uses MMCX connection. I found the connection on the 1800 to be tighter and more consistent than the FDX1, because with the latter, one side is actually quite loose and can turn very easily. However, initially with the 1800, I was occasionally losing signal on the left channel, and I had to turn the cable slightly in order to make good contact again, but reconnecting the cable resolved that problem. Let's check out the cable, which is made in Japan surprisingly enough. The two male plugs are engraved with L and R respectively to indicate the two channels. The conductor is 4N oxygen-free copper, which is of a lower purity than those exotic audiophile cables rated at 6N or even 7N if you care about that sort of thing. There's no ear guide on this cable, which makes sense given the earbud style of wear this earphone is designed for. The general design of the cable is basically the same as the FDX1 cable. The dark brown sleeving continues to be substantial, strong, and tangle-free, and combining with the choker, wide split, and the 3.5mm audio plug, which are all in black with a matte sanded texture, the cable does look quite sexy. though it is heavier and less flexible than knitted cables, meaning you can't always get the cable to sit in a tight circle. Besides, the weight of the cable means that any drastic body movement would lead the cable to whip you. You might enjoy that, no judgment, but you probably won't enjoy the cable noises it makes as a result. But in any case, the cable has good strain relief with substantial protection in all angles. So in summary, this cable should be able to take a lot of abuse and survive for years to come. Let's talk about technical specs. This earphone uses the same 11mm wood dome carbon diaphragm driver as the exquisite FW1500. The wood dome is only 50 microns thick, and the diaphragm surrounding it is made of carbon-coated PET. Supposedly, this combination makes it so that the whole unit has enough flexibility to move freely, which benefits dynamics and the production of nuanced sounds, but also has enough strength to reduce distortion at higher volume. A lot of this is probably just marketing mumble-jumble, but the key reason why they like using wood to make their drivers so much is because they think that with so many instruments being made of wood, it makes sense to use the same material in order to produce sounds that's most faithful to those instruments. But to get the driver to perform at its optimum, JVC mentions a lot of fine-tuning that went into the design of this earphone. It's all on their website, so if you're interested, definitely give it a read. Since the FW10000 uses the same driver, I went to Victor's website to do some research, Victor being what JVC is known as in Japan, by the way. And it seems the description and construction are completely identical to the FW1800, but interestingly, unlike the 1800 which uses a stainless steel cage to house the driver unit, the FW10000 uses a titanium case instead. Curiously, the cheaper FD01 also uses a titanium case, so I'm not sure how they decide on which one to use other than that it's not apparently price dependent. Coming back to the 1800, the rated frequency response is 6 to 52,000 Hz. 6 Hz is a very low number, so we should expect sub-bass extension to be phenomenal. Extending all the way up to 52,000 Hz means that, not surprisingly, this earphone is high-res certified. If even a single nerve fiber in your brain had a flash of tingling excitement from what I just said, you need to stop your audio journey immediately before you overspend on marketing snake oil. Impedance is rated at 16 ohms, and since we are talking about dynamic driver here, you probably don't have to worry too much about source impedance. Sensitivity is rated at 103 dB per milliwatt, so you probably don't have to worry about hissing from bad audio sources, but it will also not be as loud as some other IEMs when fed the same amount of power. Just turn up the volume and you'll be fine. I've also gathered the specs of the FW10000 as well as the Victor FW1500, which I mentioned during the unboxing. They share the same driver, and not surprisingly, the specs are practically identical. But notably, the 1500 goes back to using a stainless steel cage, so it's definitely more related in construction to the 1800. I've also got JVC's previous wood flagship, the FW01, for comparison. The FW01 also uses an 11mm driver, but frequency response is lower by 2000 Hz at the top end, but sensitivity is 1 dB higher. Seeing that the specs are so similar, should we expect them all to have the same sound? Well, the FDX one has similar numbers too, but right off the bat, I can tell you it sounds nothing like the 1800. So no, we can't just look at numbers. Next, let's check out the accessories. If you've seen my review of the FDX one, you will know exactly how it goes for this earphone. You get 5 pairs of Spiral Dot Plus tips from small to large. These tips are known for having tiny indents inside that supposedly adjust reflected sound and suppress turbidity. I think that's the way of saying that the tips should make the sound cleaner. The plus designation is to indicate that the tips use the SMP iFit material that's not found in the original version, and the new material is supposed to be more natural and comfortable to the skin, and I think this is something I can attest to. You also get a carrying case. It has a clamshell design that opens with a magnet, and inside it reveals an empty space lined with a burgundy felt material. It looks really nice inside and certainly does the job to store the earphone, but other than that, the only form of protection you get is just scratch resistance. No hard shell for protecting against mechanical stress, no compartments for storing desiccants or extra tips, and certainly no waterproofing. There are no other accessories aside from the tips and the carrying case, so you also don't get any cleaning tool or airline adapter. The accessories are certainly a bit on the lacking side, but overall the construction, build quality and aesthetic of the earphone check out, and they might even help you overlook the otherwise lackluster package as a result. You certainly wouldn't feel bad for buying something cheap that also looks and feels cheap or has bad QC. So all that's left is to examine the sound quality of this earphone. At $600 US, how good does the 1800 sound? In the following section, I'll talk about different aspects of sound performance of this earphone. My auditioning setup consists of the Onkyo DPX1A as the source with ACG mode on, lock ring adjust at +2, and digital filter set to sharp. I also use Tidal for additional auditioning, as well as my PC Quad Mojo setup for tests like bass rattling and perceived dynamic range. As for the earphone, I'll be using the stock 4N oxygen copper free cable, as well as the Spiral Dot Plus tips in ML size. I normally stick with M size tips for easy comparison with third-party tips, but in this case I do think there's enough difference in the seal provided between M and ML sizes that even the sound can be influenced as well, so I went with ML this time. When describing its sound signature, all my comments are going to be based around the signature of my Ultimate Ears Reference Remastered. It's currently my benchmark earphone because it has the flattest sound and the highest level of technicality in terms of driver quality, and while I fully understand there's a $100 difference between them, I do believe it's easier for me to accurately describe the signature of the earphone in question. After all, what earphone you came from will always affect how you look at the new pair. I will also make some specific comparisons with earphones I reviewed in the past that excelled in certain aspects. First, let's start with the bass. JVC claims the lowest frequency is 6 Hz, but by ear I can only get as low as 20 Hz. I honestly expected it to go even deeper, seeing that the 1800 is actually quite bassy. Still, this is somewhat supported by the fact that even though 20 Hz is the lowest I can go, that frequency is actually very audible, and in my mind I can feel something vibrating as if there's an earthquake emanating inside my head. Well, anyway, the volume increases gradually and steadily up until 130 Hz, after which the increase is slightly more drastic going into 150 Hz. If I have to guess, there's probably a hump from 150 to 160 Hz, but going into 200 Hz, the volume seems to weaken a bit. Judging from these descriptions, it should come as no surprise that the 1800 is indeed quite a bassy earphone. Whatever you imagine bass should be like for IEMs, the 1800 will get very close to your expectation. It is meaty, bodied, but weirdly enough, not overpowering. Whenever bass or anything that's in the low registers are present, it will show up as the bass line for the main melody and the vocals, and you will never find a situation where the bass is completely gone. Despite the strength of the bass tuning, I do not hear any bass rattling even with volume turned up. I say that it's not overpowering because while it's always there to add excitement to the rhythm, it doesn't really take over and become the spotlight itself. Sure, it's strong, but it's more of the accompanying type rather than the beats type. This sort of tuning really reminds me of the old FW01, which is also a wood earphone created by JVC. I don't have the FW01 in hand, but recalling my multiple occasions of auditioning that specific model, I'm happy to say that the 1800 is definitely not as thunderous as the FW01 because the mid-bass hum is less significant. That's good, because that's exactly the reason why I never had the FW01. Still, there could be times when you might actually want to have more breathing room, and the bass can sometimes fill up said breathing room too much. If airiness or soft sound is what you look for in an IEM, the 1800 is not for you. Also, if you prefer bass that's strong, punchy yet tight, the 1800 can feel a little slow. For those people, I suggest looking into the AKG N5005, which I've reviewed a long time ago. Another slight weakness to the bass is that despite its overall strong dynamics, the sub-bass isn't actually as strong as you might expect. It can unquestionably reproduce the sub-bass, of course, but it's not actually that powerful down there. Overall, I find the bass on the 1800 to be very likable. It's been a while since I reviewed earphones with strong bass, and after so many earphones with neutral or natural bass, hearing the 1800 suddenly feels like a breath of fresh air strangely enough. It doesn't follow the traditional audiophile tuning, but if like me, you're also getting a bit tired of that kind of sound, I think the 1800 would be a great complement to whatever reference sounding IEM in your collection. I, for one, prefer this over my UER for movies, video games, and certain musical genres simply because of the bass. Next, let's talk about the mids. This is arguably the most important range because how the mids are tuned can fundamentally change the quality of most music elements. I like to think of this range as the main dish, while the lows and highs are just embellishments. Starting with the lower mids, they have the same energy as the bass. Often, I complain about how an earphone doesn't completely capture the quality of a cello, but not this time. The 1800 produces cello that sounds very rich and sumptuous, and it certainly makes for a very enjoyable experience. That means whatever you imagine cello to sound like, the 1800 will give you exactly that. There's only one other earphone that performs similarly with cello, and that is the Dunnu DK3001, but even then the 1800 still sounds richer. The DK3001 on the other hand is a little bit more detailed with bowing texture and gives more obvious vibratos than the 1800, meaning the latter is flatter sounding in comparison. Still, switching immediately to my reference, the UERR, cello by the 1800 is less veiled and definitely more musical. This is a good example of why neutral IEMs are not necessarily good IEMs to enjoy music with. Now, good lower mids can also benefit male vocals, and in this case, male vocals are authoritative, firm, and embodied as expected, but it does depend on how deep the singer actually goes or the vocal quality of the singer. UERR, on the other hand, gives a more hi-fi sound, clean, balanced, but less tasteful. Unfortunately, while the 1800 really excels in lower mids, upper mids are what I find most problematic, especially when comparing with the UERR. There's some level of upper mids elevation which makes instruments like violin stand out more, but it also sounds less natural. In particular, it's almost like there's not enough air to violin's sounds, or that the sounds are not permeating enough. I also find the UERR gives a more tender presentation, which is especially apparent with slow pieces. There are also some problems with vocals. Regardless of gender, breathing by the singer can feel exaggerated with slight roughness or graininess. While being able to hear the breathing is not generally detrimental, in fact, that's something I enjoy, the graininess really breaks the immersion. Bad mastering through intentional vocal boosts in the music can exacerbate this as well. As for female vocals, I think the UERR's presentation is more tender, crystalline, and delicate, just like what I heard with violin. Finally, while vocals stand out more than UERR, the graininess and lack of airiness can both affect perceived clarity. Overall, the 1800 is a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to mids. It excels at cello and male vocals, but have some glaring issues with violins, female vocals, or really anything that's higher in the range. What a shame. Let's see if the 1800 could gain back a few points with treble. When doing frequency sweeps, I can actually hear some extremely faint shrieks starting from 21K, but my confidence level is low here. 15K is where it becomes confidently noticeable, with 13K being a sharp peak that apparently drops fast towards 12K. The volume is stable until 9 to 8K, which creeps back up noticeably but is not super loud. What do these all mean in terms of actual listening experience though? I think JVC took a safe approach with treble tuning here. That is to say that it's not particularly crispy or airy, and this is probably because the 9 to 8K peak is not prominent enough. While some might prefer this sort of tuning for less chance of fatigue, I do want to emphasize that because of this particular deficiency, certain symbols can become so weak that you might as well forget they exist. The UERR is actually quite similar in this regard, but the 9K peak is balanced better, so you can still hear those symbols if you look for them. Still, neither come close to my true benchmark for percussions or treble in general, and that is the Unique Melody Maverick. I honestly rave about that earphone too much, but if you've tried metal with it, you would know the airiness, crispiness, spaciousness, and layering just can't be beat. But coming back to the 1800, I can hear individual cymbal strikes, and the streaking effect that I talked about in my Tin Hi-Fi T4 review is absent, though again the Maverick easily trumps 1800 in this regard. Overall, while the 1800 doesn't have the treble that I want, what I want is very specific, and to other people, you might just have to try out the 1800 yourself and see whether the treble tuning bothers you. Before we go on to the next section, I want to bring up something interesting about the stock cable. I tried my AKG M5005's balance cable with the 1800 just for shits and giggles, since my DPX1A does have balanced output through its 2.5mm connector. And I found that the 1800 actually sounded better with the AKG cable than the stock cable, even when switching to the 3.5mm connector through an adapter. In particular, I found the stock cable to boost bass but weaken treble, while using the AKG cable does the opposite and somewhat alleviated my issues with cymbals. Because the lower registers of bass are weakened slightly, music is less prone to drowning during busy passages. The differences are so obvious that I had to A/B multiple times just to make sure I wasn't going nuts. As for why cable makes a difference in this case, I don't have a good answer other than that maybe the conductors are of different diameters or AWG, which can slightly change the AC resistance. I'm not cutting up my cable just to confirm this though, but at least if you have this earphone and find it too bassy or too weak with the treble, swapping to a thicker cable might help. Now let's move on to soundstage and imaging. Beginning with horizontal soundstage, I'm happy to report that I've finally found an earphone that is even wider sounding than my benchmark for this category, the Sony MDR-EX1000. When listening to sounds that are only played back in either the left or right channel, they are positioned so far away from the center points of the headspace that it's like you almost can't pinpoint them anymore. Horizontal layering is good too, so you can actually locate where sounds are coming from pretty well. Imaging on the other hand is acceptable but not perfect. There are earphones in my collection that can allow me to have a firm idea regarding the outline of the sound, so to speak, but the 1800 images them more as silhouettes with somewhat weak outlines. This won't matter to all genres of music, but if you primarily listen to chamber music and like to peek around the headspace to see the sounds imaginatively, the 1800 won't be your first choice. One thing I do appreciate about the 1800 is that the height of the soundstage is quite tall and can certainly give you a bigger sound than most IEMs, especially factoring into consideration its bass signature. But since there's only one driver, you can forget about vertical layering with this earphone, meaning you will not get the sensation that sounds are coming from different heights. Besides, due to the 1800's bass signature, the perceived soundstage might not be as open as it actually is, making it less airy and more prone to drowning. Overall, there are certainly strengths to its horizontal and vertical performance, but they aren't perfect by any means. If you want strong imaging, consider something else. Let's also quickly touch on dynamic range. A larger dynamic range means you can more easily discern loud and weak sounds, and earphones with very good seal tend to perform better in this test. By ear, it can reach -66 dB max, but at such a low volume, the only thing that I can remotely hear is extremely faint shrieks of sibilant sounds. Actually, I would say -48 dB is the threshold for voices, and going below that, you will only hear s and sh. My UERR can get lower with -54 dB with voices. For now, I'll keep the rating at 66 dB, but in the future, I will have to go back to past earphones that I've reviewed in order to make a second graph for better illustrating the max range for voices and sibilant sounds. I have to stress, however, that this test is not super reliable because A. I did it with my own ears, and our ears are not equally sensitive. B. The test is done in steps of 6 dB, so I can't test any intermediate SPLs between two steps. And finally, you can only benefit from a large dynamic range when your surrounding is quiet. Overall, this test is just for fun. That's it for sound analysis. Let's move on to ear-tip matching. I've got many single flange and double flange models of spin-fit ear tips courtesy of the company, 2 models of Comply being the Isolation and Comfort series, as well as rare stuff like Sony hybrids and a recent addition to this section, the final E-Type. Just like the Tin Hi-Fi T4, this earphone also has exceedingly good compatibility, and that means I once again have to test out pretty much all the tips I have shown in this shot, barring the double flange ones, simply because I don't think they are comfortable or conducive to sonic improvements. Anyway, this time I want to try something different. Instead of telling you what I think of all these tips when paired with the earphone, I will only talk about tips that are particularly interesting regarding sonic improvements. That way I can keep this part less bloated, especially when so many tips are involved. Alright, here we go. There are 3 tips that I recommend. The first one is the CP360 by SpinFit. This one technically doesn't fit the 1800, but if you try it hard enough, you can still jam it on, but that also means removing it is extra tough. You also need to go up a size with these, so if you normally get size M tips, with these you need size L. I find that the CP360 can weaken the mid-bass but keep the sub-bass, as well as allowing vocals to stand out more and have more air. All of these will be greatly appreciated if you do find the earphone too bassy or too dense sounding. Cymbals also sound more natural, especially with decay that's rid of graininess and doesn't sound splashy. It even solves my complaint about losing certain percussions. Now, if you actually want to use something that's more for the size of the 1800, the CP500 would be another good choice. Just like what I've mentioned in the past, the fitting of this tip is quite finicky because of its wide shape and large flange, so you should only go for a shallow fit for the best seal. Just like the CP360, it weakens mid-bass but keeps the sub-bass, so bass extension is not affected at all. Again, I also see the same improvements in treble with the CP360. So no missing percussions, good decay and not too splashy. I also find that vocals are very clear. Overall, this tip behaves mostly the same as the CP360, except it actually fits the 1800 naturally. It's just that you can't have these too deep into your ears, or else the seal and subsequently bass response would suffer. Finally, if you're looking for drastic changes in the sound signature, you should definitely check out the final E-Type. If you have a fresh pair of these, the fits can be a bit tight because of the way these tips are constructed. Just jam it on to loosen up the core. In terms of sonic changes, of all the tips in my collection, the E-Type weakens the bass the most. I think this is more of a characteristic of these tips rather than a problem with size and seal, because I get the same sound regardless of M or ML tips, not to mention M already feels perfect for me. This change will be most appreciated by those who, for whatever reason, didn't expect this earphone to be bassy, because maybe you never tried any JVC Wood series earphones before. Another change I noticed with the bass is that it is not as punchy. It's like it's got maybe 70% of the punchiness. These changes will not be welcomed by those who want to keep the 1800 bass response, while those who want it to be closer to natural warm will really like these changes. I also find that vocals are cleaner sounding, but at times it might feel very slightly shouty. Another thing I noticed is that I can hear more detail in the mid-range due to there being better layering. It could just be because the overall tonality is more balanced. As for the treble, I once again found no missing percussions and good cymbal decay. Treble is even brighter than with the CP360 or 500. In a sense, these changes mimic what I found with the cable swap, and they make the E-Type the premier choice for metal. Overall, if you came from the FDX1 thinking that's JVC's house sound, pairing that with the final E-Type will give you the sound that's closest to that. However, this combination is warmer, has less treble still, and better sub-bass extension comparing to the FDX1, as well as a taller soundstage. But those who just want to tune down the bass a bit and get more good quality treble should go for the SpinFit CP360 or 500 instead. I originally bought the JVC FW1800 because it uses the same wood dome driver as the one found in the top-of-the-line FW10000, and while I still don't have the 10000 to compare this to because of its prohibitively high price tag even in the second-hand market, there are still certainly things that I really like about the 1800, as well as things that I felt should be handled better. Starting with the things I like, I really enjoy the bass and the lower mids. While an emphasis in these two ranges do trade away some of the perceived clarity of the overall signature, for someone like me who has so many natural to neutral sounding earphones, the 1800's tuning suddenly feels like a breath of fresh air. Lower mids is sumptuous and meaty, and so cello and male vocals both benefit. But moving away from these two ranges is where I felt JVC kind of dropped the ball with this earphone. There are a lot of problems with this approach of upper mids elevation, which turns out to work against female vocals, violin, or anything that's higher in the range. And this is especially apparent when comparing to my reference earphone of sound signature, the UERR. Treble doesn't impress me either. What I like is clean, crispy, airy, and permeating treble that doesn't magically make certain percussions disappear, and the 1800 is none of those. Had they added more emphasis to the 8 to 9K range, I would have liked the treble more, though the relatively strong presence of bass and low mids would have to be tuned down as well to achieve that kind of sound, and some people might not be into that. As for me, I fully anticipated the sound signature of this earphone because I heard the FW01, which is an older product in JVC's Wood series of earphones. And while I do think the 1800 probably sounds better than that, I still felt like JVC could have struck a better tonal balance to sort of keep the lower registers while make it so that female vocals and treble don't suffer too much. Luckily, if like me you're not 100% satisfied with the sound signature, you can either opt for some third-party tips, in particular the SpinFit CP360, 500 and the final E-Type, or pair the 1800 with another cable. Yes, you heard me right, cable. By swapping to this stock cable I got with the AKG N5005, there are certain sonic changes that actually make the 1800 more enjoyable for me, due to there being a better balance between the bass and the treble. If you have some MMCX cables lying around, you might as well pair them with the 1800 just to see how you like the sound. However, third-party tips or cables would be extra cost for you if you don't already have those, and at an MSRP of $600 it's perfectly sensible for general consumers to assume that they don't have to buy extra stuff to get it to sound right. Of course, if you're savvy enough, you can try EQing as well, but EQ isn't attached to the earphone, so you have to install extra software or spend time actually adjusting the EQ on multiple devices. Desktop, laptop, smartphone, DAP, that's 4 devices I have to set up separately if I go for EQ. Fortunately, in terms of Soundstage, I did find a few things that I like about the 1800. It has become the widest sounding earphone in my collection, beating out the long-time champion Sony MDR-X1000, and will surely become my new benchmark in this category. The Soundstage is not just wide. This is an earphone that can give you a big sound because of the tall height of the Soundstage. And while imaging is just average and vertical layering is absent, I feel like this earphone can work really well with classical work. Just make sure there aren't many violins involved in whatever you listen to, I suppose. So in conclusion, should you buy the JVC FW1800? You should buy this if you already have some neutral sounding earphones in your collection and is looking for something more fun and musical. But you shouldn't buy this as your only earphone because it doesn't do enough things well enough. But for the things that it does well, they are just so freaking good. I belong to the first group of people, so I'll happily keep using this earphone, but not without a new cable or the particular models of third-party tips I mentioned just now. As for those who have the FD01 or FDX1 and is considering this earphone, I'll actually make a separate video just to compare the sonic differences, so stay tuned for that. But otherwise, this is going to be it for this review. If you found it useful, don't forget to like and share the video. If you have any question, please let me know in the comment section below. If you have this earphone, I would also love to know what you think of it. Anyway, I'll come back with yet another earphone review. Hopefully I will see you again in the next video. Goodbye friends.